Hello. Uh, let's see. I'm Jessica Parker, and this is my third, maybe fourth video I'm doing, and I'm calling it Keeping It Real. And this is my YouTube channel, and I'm trying to share a lot of this on different avenues of social media. So I will put it on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, I guess. So, anyways, welcome back if you're keeping up and watching each week. Last week and a little the week before, we talked about self-narratives and about how they help us in many ways and how they can harm us. And what we basically tell ourselves about ourselves. And this week I want to talk about how that plays out when it comes to our interpersonal relationships. And so one of the things that comes up, and we hear this a lot, is codependent relationships, codependency. And essentially, this happens when we're having a self-narrative that we're hanging on to, an identity of sorts, and that is married or combined with someone else's self-narrative or identity in a way that causes dysfunction. And in that case, it would be, for instance, say, if somebody is doing something that's not beneficial to themselves or their self-growth, oftentimes we are in relationships where we are, if it's codependency, we are perpetuating those obstacles and those dysfunctions with one another. It can become like a cyclical kind of thing. And I always like to talk about Ernie Larson's, and I'm not an expert, but he, back in the day, he was kind of like a guru of sorts when it comes to substance abuse, addictions, and codependency. And he would say, alcoholics are just codependents who drink. Now, I don't know how true that is entirely, but one of the things that he discussed was self-defeating learned behaviors. And he talked about the dynamics of codependency. And as Ernie Larson's put it, he said, caregivers always end up with babies. And if you think of it, it makes sense, right? And he kind of got to the point. That was his way to term it. But caregivers, like to care for others. And then the babies are the ones who need caring for. Now, why is this dysfunctional? Caring for others, isn't that really a virtuous thing? Sure. The problem is that when we are caring for others to prop up our self-narrative, not for the betterment of our person that we're in a relationship with, and not for the betterment of the relationship itself, but mostly so I can say, I am a good caregiver. And then what's next after that would be something maybe like, I'm a good caregiver, and therefore I'm a good person. I'm doing my job. I'm good at this. This person needs me, and I can provide something for them. And now, of course, what happens oftentimes is that, and this is what Ernie Larson's would also suggest, is that caregivers tend to create babies. If it's not a baby in their life, they will make it a baby. And that means by, overcompensating, doing things for others when, quite frankly, they don't need to, but also they probably shouldn't. These are things that people should be doing for themselves, and it's for the purpose of self-empowerment. So caregivers will create babies that they make dependent on them so they can feel good about themselves. And they later grow to resent those babies, right? Because now the babies are dependent upon them. And we're using this term, I realize, grown adults are not babies. But it does suggest that, the dynamic is there. If there's a person who's, could be afraid of being on their own or doing for themselves, they might lean into having someone who will do that for them. But it doesn't necessarily make it better or helpful. Again, because we should be able to do some things for ourselves, and it's healthy. It's healthy. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to be afraid. It's also okay to help people, but not to the detriment of cutting somebody's ability to care for themselves off. At that point, it's dysfunction, and therein lies the codependent relationship. Now, Ernie Larson's used to also say that, people pleasers always end up with abusers. And then kind of makes sense, right? If I have somebody who is, always wanting to make people happy, what's the benefit to that? Well, the benefit is that I can say, people, they're happy to be around me. I do things that make people feel good. And when I do that, I feel good. I feel wanted. I feel desired. I feel like people like me, and that makes me feel important. The problem is that, some folks who see this and know that there's a person who, if it's dysfunctional to some degree, will do anything to make people happy, it can be easier to abuse that, right? Because they don't see it necessarily, the receiving end of that, the abuser, doesn't necessarily see it as somebody helping or being kind as much as that's your role. You are the person who does things, and I'm the person in this relationship who accepts things. That's our dynamic. We have created these roles. This is kind of, going back to what we discussed about self-narratives and what we tell ourselves about ourselves. So it's really important that we, hopefully observe these things about ourselves. Sometimes, we want to know why, and that's okay. I like to focus more on where do we go with this now? Like, is this acceptable for me? Is this helpful? Is it harmful? How is it harmful? What can I do differently? And that can be tricky because that means there's got to be a lot of self-acceptance. And again, it's hard, without criticism and judgment about others and ourselves. And of course, sometimes you'll hear in therapeutic circles, we call it radical acceptance, right? But it is important because to grow and to free ourselves from these narratives, and to allow ourselves to be the people we are or want to be, who we're becoming, we have to not only look at our roles, our narratives, our self-statements, but we also have to look at how it's affecting others and how we're affected by those relationship dynamics. People can live their whole lives in codependent relationships. They exist out there a lot. And some people might just say, we just grew comfortable. That's just how our relationship is. But it doesn't make it healthy. And for folks who are looking to, improve their mental, emotional, and physical health, I would suggest that, we have to work on ourselves. A lot of times when we make improvements with self, it can actually cause the relationship to become severed. We see a lot of codependent relationships When somebody gets better, that means that they're pulling away, they're not living up to that role. The self-narrative's changed, and therefore their role in the relationship has changed. And that can cause problems. A codependent will likely try to sabotage that. Like, I don't want to lose this person in my life and the dynamic we have, what I'm getting from this. So I might try to make them feel, if they're the baby and I'm the caregiver, perhaps I will make them feel like they really can't live without me and they need me. If I am, the abuser, I might make the person feel guilty, the people pleaser, to try to keep them there. And it's not always just straight abuse. It can be fear. I'm afraid of change. What is it going to look like? If we're both healthy and well, can we stay in this relationship? And sometimes no, we can't. And that's the fear that causes people to become avoidant or hesitant about healing, improving and working on ourselves to be the best versions of ourselves. So I hope that helps. I think that part of what I do as a therapist is to help my clients to focus on what they can do in the moment that they're in the life that they have, to improve things for themselves. And it may seem a little selfish, but I'd like to think of it as doing our part. So yeah, I hope that helps, and I hope to see you back here next week. Have a great weekend. Bye.